The envelope trembled in Harold's weathered hands, her unmistakable handwriting jolting him like an electric shock. 21 years of carefully rebuilt life threatened by crisp white paper on his kitchen table. He inhaled sharply, pot roast aroma from family dinner now soured by the intrusion. His fingers traced the unopened edge as memories flooded back. Rachel's first steps without a mother to witness, Jake's baseball games with empty bleacher spaces, Daniel's graduation questions about the woman in faded photos. Has someone who abandoned you suddenly returned? Share your story below, like if this betrayal resonates. Follow to see if Harold finds peace or renewed pain. The first line blurred as tears gathered. After all these years, I need to see you. Coffee grew cold beside him, the grandfather clock's steady ticking a mockery of time lost. One tear escaped, splashing onto her name, smudging the ink like she'd smudged their lives. Harold's shoulders curved inward as the first quiet sob escaped. Harold's weathered hands trembled as he stared at the pristine envelope on his desk. The handwriting, hers unmistakably, sent a jolt through his chest that nearly stopped his breath. 21 years since she'd walked away, leaving him alone with 3 small children, and now this crisp white intrusion in today's mail. The evening shadows lengthened across his study, filled with framed milestones she'd missed. Graduations, weddings, a grandbaby's christening last spring. His fingers hesitated over the envelope's edge, the grandfather clock in the corner measuring out seconds that suddenly felt precious, as if opening it might steal something he couldn't get back. Not now, he whispered, voice cracking slightly in the empty room. But his hands betrayed him, carefully breaking the seal as memories flooded back. Sunday dinners with Rachel, helping at 8 years old. Jake's baseball games he'd rush to after double shifts. Daniel asking innocent questions about the woman in faded photographs. The first line blurred as tears gathered. After all these years, I need to see you. His coffee cup slipped, shattering against the hardwood floor. Dark liquid spread across polished boards, ignored as he continued reading. Eric, the man she'd left them for, had died 6 months ago. Cancer. She was alone now, filled with regret, wanting to reconnect with the family she'd abandoned. Harold sank into his leather chair, the familiar creak a strange comfort as his world tilted. One tear escaped, then another, tracking down lined cheeks that had weathered 2 decades of single parenthood. His chest tightened, a quiet sob escaping before he could catch it. "Ain't right," he murmured, the colloquialism of his youth slipping out in distress. "Ain't right to come back now." His hand reached for the family photo taken at Christmas, all 3 children, successful adults now, gathered around him. His finger traced each face, lingering on Rachel's smile, so like her mother's, though she'd hate the comparison. The glass reflected his own face, dignified despite the tears, gray hair, and weathered skin, marking years she hadn't shared. A drop fell on the letter, smudging her signature. Harold blinked, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. The smudge caught his attention, something odd about how the ink ran. His mechanic's eye, retired 15 years now, but still precise, noticed the peculiarity. The signature looked different from the handwriting above, as if. He examined it closer, suspicion cutting through grief. Why now, after all this time? What did she really want? A soft knock at the front door startled him. Harold glanced at the clock. Nearly 8. Too late for casual visitors. He slipped the letter into his desk drawer, composing himself with a deep breath. The knock came again, more insistent. Friend or foe, only one way to find out. Harold wiped his eyes hastily before answering Rachel's call. The phone's cheerful ring, a stark contrast to the hollowness in his chest. He took a steadying breath, decades of practice hiding difficulties from his children taking over. "Hey, sweetheart," he answered, voice carefully controlled despite the letter still visible on his desk. "Dad, I got the promotion." Rachel's excitement bubbled through the line. "Senior partner, just like I told you last Sunday. They called this afternoon." "That's wonderful news," Harold replied, genuine pride momentarily displacing his turmoil. His eldest had her mother's determination, but none of her selfishness. "I always knew you had it in you." He half listened as Rachel detailed the office politics she'd navigated, his eyes fixed on the envelope's edge, peeking from beneath the scattered papers. The clock ticked steadily in the background, marking minutes of normal conversation, while his world tilted beneath him. "Dad, you still there?" Rachel's voice sharpened with concern. "You sound off." Harold's fingers unconsciously touched the faint tan line where his wedding band had once sat. 21 years, and still his skin remembered. "Just tired, darlin'," he deflected, the endearment slipping out naturally. "These old bones don't recover like they used to." "You sure that's all?" Her lawyer's instinct, honed through years of watching him raise them alone, detected the subtle strain in his voice. "Course I am. Tell me more about that corner office they promised." After ending the call with assurances about Sunday dinner, Harold exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging with released tension. And he reread the letter more carefully, noticing details missed in his initial shock. Margaret included a photo, their old family portrait from before she left. The children so young, Rachel with missing front teeth, Jake clutching his baseball mitt, baby Daniel on Harold's knee. A stronger wave of emotion hit him, seeing how small they'd been when abandoned. His thumb brushed over their innocent faces, memory sharp as glass. The night he'd told them Mommy wasn't coming home, Rachel's silent tears, Jake's confusion, Daniel too young to understand, but crying because his siblings did. "You don't get to waltz back now," Harold whispered to Margaret's image. "Not after we built something without you." The decision formed slowly, but with certainty. The children, adults now, with lives Margaret knew nothing about, deserved to know she'd reached out. But he wouldn't ambush them with this. They needed time, preparation. He'd tell them Sunday, together, where they could support each other. Harold slid the letter into his desk drawer, where important family documents lived, birth certificates, graduation programs, the deed to the home he'd nearly lost after she left, but had fought to keep for the children's stability. The drawer closed with soft finality, containing the threat temporarily. In the polished wood of his desk, Harold caught his reflection, more gray than brown in his hair now, lines etched around eyes that had seen both hardship and joy. The face of a man who'd rebuilt from ashes, not the devastated husband she'd left behind. As he rose stiffly from his chair, Harold noticed the wedding band tan line again, faint but visible after all these years. Physical reminder of abandonment's permanence despite emotional healing. Some marks never fully disappeared, just faded enough to carry. The broken coffee cup still lay forgotten on the floor, dark liquid seeping into floorboard cracks. Like her letter, seeping into his carefully constructed peace. Morning sunlight streamed across Harold's kitchen table, harsh and unforgiving on the scattered paper fragments of his multiple attempted responses. His coffee sat cooling in the pot, forgotten as he struggled to find words adequate for 21 years of silence. "Dear Margaret," he'd written, then crossed out. Too familiar. "Ms. Cooper," he'd tried next, then torn that page as well. Too formal. The pen hovered over his fifth attempt. Indecision unusual for a man who'd made countless difficult choices alone. Harold glanced at the family calendar hanging on the refrigerator, crowded with visits, birthdays, and activities. The busy life they'd built without her. What would each child want? Rachel would demand he tell Margaret to stay away, her protective instinct fierce as always. Jake would appear calm but watch carefully, measuring every word as he did with his woodworking. Daniel might be curious, having the fewest memories of his mother. "What right does she have?" Harold muttered, tearing another draft into precise quarters before adding it to the growing pile. His usual methodical nature couldn't navigate this unexpected terrain. The kitchen clock's steady ticking reminded him of passing time. Sunday dinner was only 3 days away. The children would be here, together, the right moment to tell them. But Margaret deserved some response before then. Harold rubbed his forehead, feeling every one of his 65 years weighing on him. A direct conversation would be better than any letter. Harold searched through Margaret's envelope again, looking for a phone number, finding instead an address in Oak Ridge Heights, the upscale neighborhood across town. She'd moved back, was already here, not just reaching out from afar as he'd assumed. The discovery sent another jolt through him. She was close, perhaps had been for weeks. Had she seen the children without their knowledge, watched them from a distance? The thought made his jaw tighten. Harold reached for his car keys, deciding to drive to the address, speak with her at a neutral location where he could maintain control of the situation. Better to handle this directly than let it fester until Sunday. He'd never been one to postpone difficult tasks. The familiar weight of the keys in his palm brought a moment of steadiness. He'd face this, like he'd faced everything since she left, with dignity and the strength he'd discovered only after being abandoned with 3 small children. "One step at a time, old man," he told himself, standing straighter despite the anxiety tightening his chest. The doorbell's unexpected chime froze him mid-motion. Harold glanced at the clock. Barely 11, too early for package deliveries or neighborhood children selling fundraiser items. His heart quickened as he moved toward the entryway, colored light from the stained glass door panels dancing across the hardwood floor. Through the decorative glass, he could make out a woman's silhouette. Something in the posture, the way she shifted her weight slightly, familiar despite the decades, made his breath catch. Harold paused, hand on the doorknob, allowing himself one final moment of peace before opening the door to his past. He squared his shoulders, jaw set with determination. The knob turned under his grip, the door swinging open to reveal Margaret standing on his porch, 21 years older, but unmistakable, clutching her purse with nervous fingers, a small suitcase resting beside her feet. "Hello, Harold," she said softly, her voice both strange and hauntingly familiar. "I know I should have called first." For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the threshold. Harold took in the changes 21 years had wrought. Gray threaded through her once auburn hair, fine lines around eyes that had once laughed so easily, an uncertainty in her posture that the Margaret he'd known never displayed. "May I come in?" she finally asked, breaking the heavy silence. Harold stepped back wordlessly, a reluctant invitation into the home she'd abandoned. He led her to the living room, a space she'd never seen, redecorated years ago to erase her lingering presence. Family photos covered the walls, a visual timeline of milestones she'd missed. Graduations, weddings, holidays, the birth of Rachel's daughter last year. Margaret perched on the edge of the sofa while Harold settled into his armchair, deliberately maintaining distance between them. He noticed her eyes darting to the photographs, registering each absence in her life. "Coffee?" he offered, more from ingrained politeness than hospitality. "Please," she nodded, hands fidgeting with her purse strap. A herald returned from the kitchen with 2 mugs, setting hers on the coffee table between them. The barrier felt necessary, symbolic. "I got your letter," he said unnecessarily, his voice steady despite the turmoil beneath. Margaret nodded, eyes lowering briefly. "I wasn't sure you'd read it, or if you'd still be here." "Where else would I be?" The question came out sharper than intended. This was our children's home. Someone needed to keep it for them. She flinched slightly at the emphasis on our children and the implied accusation. "Eric died 6 months ago," she began, the rehearsed quality of her words suggesting she'd practiced this conversation many times. "Pancreatic cancer. It was quick at the end." Harold's face remained impassive. "I'm sorry for your loss." The words were automatic, devoid of emotion. After he was gone, I started thinking about everything, the choices I made. Her voice trembled slightly. "The biggest mistake of my life was leaving you and the children." Harold watched her nervous hands constantly moving, adjusting her hair, straightening her skirt, touching her necklace. His own remained perfectly still on the armrests of his chair, a study in contrasts. 21 years is a long time for regret, Margaret. "I know." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I know it's selfish to come back now. But I had to try. I've missed so much of their lives." "Your choice," Harold interrupted, the words firm but not cruel. "You chose to miss those years." "I did." A tear slipped down her cheek. "And I can never get them back. But maybe I could know them now, as adults, get to see the people they've become." Harold looked at the family photo taken last Christmas. "They've become remarkable people, no thanks to your absence." "I'm sure that's because of you," she offered, attempting a connection. "It's because of who they are. Their own strength." Harold's gaze returned to her, direct and unwavering. "What exactly do you want, Margaret?" She took a shaky breath. "To meet them, to apologize, to see if there's any possibility of some kind of relationship." "That's not my decision to make," Harold said, after a long pause. "They're adults now." Hope flickered across her face. "Then you'll tell them I'm here? That I want to see them?" "I'll tell them," he agreed. "But I won't influence their choice either way." "And what about us, Harold?" Margaret asked, hesitantly. "Is there any chance?" "There is no us," he interrupted, voice gentler than his words. "I don't hate you any more, Margaret. I don't love you either. I feel nothing." The finality in his tone seemed to hit her harder than anger would have. Her shoulders slumped slightly. "I've rented an apartment in Oak Ridge Heights," she said, after composing herself. "I'll be staying for a while, regardless of what happens today. Here's my number." She placed a card on the coffee table. Harold nodded once, acknowledging the information without commitment. "They're not your children anymore, Margaret," he said quietly. "They're adults who don't know you. Remember that, whatever you're hoping for." Margaret wiped a tear, nodding. "When will you tell them?" "Sunday. They come for dinner every week." "Another tradition I've missed," she whispered, almost to herself. Harold watched her, this stranger who had once been his wife, and felt the strangest sense of peace. The woman before him couldn't hurt him anymore. She held no power over his happiness, his sense of self, his future. "I should go," Margaret said, rising. She hadn't touched her coffee. Harold walked her to the door, maintaining the same careful distance. On the porch, she turned back, hesitating. "Thank you, for raising them so well, for," she gestured vaguely, "all of this." I didn't do it for you, Harold replied simply. I did it for them and for me. He closed the door gently but firmly as she walked away, returning to the living room to look at his family's photographs, complete without her. The reflection in the glass showed a man at peace with his choices, whatever storms might come. Sunday evening arrived with the comforting predictability Harold had cultivated over 2 decades of single parenthood. The dining room table, expanded with its leaf to accommodate all 3 children, was set with the mismatched plates they'd collected over years of birthdays and Christmases. Pot roast, the family favorite, filled the house with familiar aromas. Harold checked his watch. 10 minutes until they'd arrive, his punctual children. 10 minutes to prepare himself for the conversation that would disrupt their carefully constructed peace. Rachel arrived first, as always. At 30, she carried herself with the confidence of the newly promoted senior partner she was, but her smile for Harold was still that of the 8-year-old who'd helped him figure out how to braid her own hair after her mother left. Something smells amazing, she said, kissing his cheek before hanging her coat. Need any help? All under control, Harold assured her, watching as she automatically checked the table settings, straightening a fork here, adjusting a napkin there, her mother's perfectionism without the selfishness. Jake arrived next, bringing a bottle of wine and the quiet presence that had defined him since childhood. At 27, he'd channeled his introspective nature into custom furniture making, his hands steadier than Harold's had ever been. Dad, he nodded, the simple greeting conveying genuine warmth. Jake had never needed many words to communicate. Daniel burst in last, apologizing for nearly being late. The youngest at 24, he'd been a baby when Margaret left, with no real memories of his mother. Perhaps that explained his perpetual curiosity, his research-focused mind always collecting information as if to fill in blanks. Traffic was ridiculous, he explained, adjusting his glasses. But I made it. What's for dessert? Harold absorbed the sight of them, his greatest achievements, his real legacy. Their weekly dinners had sustained them through years of challenges. How many conversations had this table witnessed? First dates, college decisions, career changes, all navigated together. They settled into their usual seats, the empty chair at the table's end suddenly significant again after years of being just part of the furniture. Harold served the meal, waiting until they'd all taken a few bites before clearing his throat. There's something I need to tell you all, he began, setting down his fork. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him, Rachel's sharp and assessing, Jake's watchful, Daniel's curious. Your mother contacted me this week. She's back in town. Harold kept his voice neutral, factual. The reaction was immediate. Rachel's fork clattered against her plate, her face flushing with sudden anger. Jake's expression barely changed, though his hand tightened visibly around his wineglass. Daniel's eyes widened, glancing between his siblings as if to gauge the appropriate response. What does she want? Rachel demanded, always the protector, the first to leap to Harold's defense. She says she wants to meet you all, to apologize. Harold looked each child in the eye. She came to the house on Thursday. She was here? Rachel's voice rose slightly. In our home? Yes. We talked briefly. And? Jake's single word held multiple questions. Harold sighed. Eric died 6 months ago. Cancer. She says she regrets leaving, wants to reconnect with you 3. After 21 years? Rachel scoffed. That's convenient. Her replacement husband dies, so she remembers she has a family? Rachel, Harold said gently. No, Dad. She abandoned us. All of us. Rachel's protective anger had always been her way of processing pain. She doesn't get to waltz back in because she's lonely now. What did you tell her? Daniel asked, his researcher's mind seeking data. That it wasn't my decision to make. You're adults now. Each of you gets to decide for yourselves whether you want to see her. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Half-eaten food grew cold as the implications settled. Are you considering it? Rachel asked her father directly. Harold shook his head. There's nothing there for me anymore. But this isn't about me. Of course it is, Rachel insisted. She hurt you worst of all. You were 8 when she left, Rachel. You remember her? You remember the before and after. That's its own kind of hurt. Rachel's eyes glistened, rare vulnerability showing through her composed exterior. I remember you working 2 jobs. I remember you learning to French braid my hair from a library book. Jake set down his glass carefully. Does she know about Lily? He asked, referring to Rachel's infant daughter. Harold shook his head. I didn't share any details of your lives. Good, Rachel said firmly. She doesn't deserve to know my daughter. I'd like to meet her, Daniel said suddenly, surprising everyone. Rachel turned to him, incredulous. Why would you want that? Because I don't remember her at all. She's just a concept to me, a blank space. Daniel shrugged. I'm curious. She doesn't deserve your curiosity, Rachel snapped. Maybe not, Daniel acknowledged, but I'd still like to know who she is. Jake, who had remained mostly silent, finally spoke. I've already met her. 3 faces turned to him in shock. You what? Rachel nearly shouted. When? Last week. She approached me outside my workshop. Jake's calm seemed to irritate Rachel further. She recognized me from my website photos. And you didn't think to tell us? Rachel demanded. I was processing it, Jake replied simply. She seems different than I expected. Different how? Daniel leaned forward, eager for information. Sadder, more real. Jake looked at his father. She's not the monster in my head anymore. She doesn't have to be a monster to be selfish, Rachel countered. Dad, you can't seriously be okay with this. Harold reached across the table, taking his daughter's hand. What I'm okay with is you all making your own choices. You don't have to agree with each other. Rachel pulled her hand away, pushing her chair back. This is insane. After everything she put us through, put you through, we're actually considering letting her back in? No one's letting anyone in automatically, Harold said steadily. But shutting the door without hearing her out is your choice to make, not mine to make for you. I can't believe this. Rachel stood, pacing behind her chair. Jake secretly meets her. Daniel wants to satisfy his curiosity, and you're just, what, neutral? Not neutral, Harold corrected. Supportive of whatever you each decide. The family dinner, usually a source of comfort, had transformed into the first serious disagreement they'd had in years. Harold watched his children struggle, each processing differently. Rachel's protective anger, Jake's measured assessment, Daniel's curious uncertainty. I think we should meet her together, Daniel suggested, as a family, united front. Jake nodded slowly. I could do that. Rachel stared at them both, then at her father. And if I don't want to? Then you don't, Harold said simply. No one will force you, Rachel. She leaned on her chair, conflict visible on her face. Family loyalty warred with righteous anger. If I agreed to one meeting, it would only be to make sure she understands what she did to us. To you. Harold nodded, accepting her terms without judgment. "I still don't understand how you can be so calm about this," she said to her father. "I've had 21 years to make peace with what happened," Harold replied. "And I discovered something when she showed up at the door." "What's that?" Daniel asked. "That she can't hurt me anymore." Harold looked at each of his children. "My happiness doesn't depend on her in any way. Neither does my sense of who I am." The simple truth landed heavily in the room. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but recognition. She'd spent a lifetime defending her father, perhaps not realizing he'd found his own strength long ago. "You're adults now," Harold continued. "This is your choice to make." Has a long-absent person tried to re-enter your life? Comment your experience below, like if this family's struggle resonates with you, follow to see how they navigate this impossible situation together. The tension in the room gradually shifted. Though dinner was forgotten, something else was happening. The family was processing together, as they always had. Different perspectives, different reactions, but still connected. "One meeting," Rachel finally conceded. "Together. And then I decide if there's ever a second one." Harold nodded, proud of her for finding her own way through the conflict. Proud of all of them. "When?" Daniel asked. "I'll call her tomorrow," Harold said. "You three decide when you're ready." As the conversation continued, plans forming, and boundaries being set, Harold observed his children with quiet satisfaction. Whatever happened with Margaret, these three remarkable adults would be okay. They had each other. They had him. The family they'd built without her was strong enough to face whatever came next. Rachel paced her apartment that night, unable to sleep. The tasteful decor, modern, orderly, everything in its place, usually calmed her, but tonight it felt like a stage set, artificially perfect. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk, removing a worn shoebox she rarely acknowledged. Inside lay childhood mementos, report cards her father had proudly displayed, softball trophies, and a few yellowed photographs from before. Rachel lifted one, a family picnic, her mother's arm around her small shoulders. She was missing her front teeth, grinning widely. "How could you just leave?" she whispered to the image, anger resurging. Rachel had spent her life becoming everything her mother wasn't: reliable, successful, present. She had structured her world to prove abandonment hadn't broken her. Her phone chimed with a text from Jake. "You okay?" Her brother always sensed when she was struggling. Rachel hesitated, then replied, "Processing." "You?" The response came quickly. "Workshop. Call if you need me." Rachel knew what that meant. Jake would be sanding something into submission, his methodical approach to emotional turmoil. She almost smiled, picturing him in his sacred space, surrounded by the scent of wood and varnish. In his workshop, Jake ran sandpaper over maple with practiced strokes, finding comfort in the repetitive motion. Dust motes danced in the single work light, his breath forming small clouds in the unheated space. The half-finished rocking chair was for Lily, Rachel's daughter. His niece would never know the grandmother-shaped hole they'd all carried. Or would she now? Jake paused, remembering the moment Margaret had approached him outside his workshop last week. He'd recognized her instantly. Older, grayer, but unmistakable. His childhood memories of her were fragmented but sharp. Her perfume, her laugh, the sound of the front door closing behind her for the last time. "Jake," she'd said, voice uncertain. "You look so much like your father." He'd said little, letting her nervous words fill the space between them. She seemed smaller than in his memories, more human than the abandoning villain of family lore. Jake set down the sandpaper, pulling out his phone to search her name again. Margaret Cooper, regional sales manager at Bentley Pharmaceuticals until last year. Social media sparse but existing. A life parallel to theirs, continuing while separate. He hadn't told his father or siblings about the meeting because he needed to understand his own reaction first. Not anger, not joy, just curiosity and a strange sense of disconnection, like meeting a character from a book he'd read long ago. Jake picked up a different piece of sandpaper, resuming his work. Whatever happened next, the family they'd built would remain. Of that, he was certain. Daniel sat cross-legged on his bed, laptop balanced on his knees, scrolling through search results he'd reviewed dozens of times before. Margaret Cooper's digital footprint was modest but traceable. Professional profiles, mentions in industry publications, a few photos from corporate events. Unlike his siblings, Daniel had no real memories of their mother. She existed for him primarily as an absence, a story told by others, her features sometimes visible in Rachel's smile or his own eyes in the mirror. He'd created research files years ago, his methodical mind trying to understand the woman who had given birth to him and then left when he was barely walking. Tonight, he added new notes from what his father had shared. Eric, E=deceased. Cancer, 6 months ago, currently renting in Oak Ridge Heights. Expressed regret. Jake met her. Sadder. More real. Daniel adjusted his glasses, a habit when deep in thought. He'd spent his life collecting facts about everything, filling knowledge gaps with information. But facts couldn't tell him what he really wanted to know. Who was she, beyond the woman who left? What would he feel when he finally saw her face to face? His phone buzzed with Rachel's text to their siblings' group chat. "I'll go with the United Front plan. Thursday evening work for everyone." Jake responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Daniel typed, "Yes, neutral location, cafe instead of home." Rachel, "Definitely neutral ground. I'll ask Dad to arrange it." Daniel closed his laptop, lying back on his pillow. Thursday. 3 days to prepare for meeting the mystery woman who had shaped his life through her absence. Harold's phone lit up with Rachel's message as he sat in his study, surrounded by family photos. She'd agreed to the meeting, Thursday evening at Riverside Cafe, neutral territory. He'd call Margaret in the morning, set the details. For now, Harold simply sat with the knowledge that all 3 children had found their way to a decision that felt right to them, even if it wasn't the same decision. Rachel had called earlier, her voice tight with emotion. "I'm not doing this for her," she'd insisted. "I'm doing it for closure, for us." "I know, sweetheart," he'd replied, hearing the little girl behind the accomplished attorney's voice. Jake had texted his agreement without elaboration, typical of his thoughtful nature. Whatever he'd learned from his secret meeting with Margaret, he was processing it in his own careful way. Daniel had called with practical questions. How long should they plan to stay? Should they prepare what they wanted to say? Was there anything about their mother's personality they should know beforehand? Harold had answered patiently, giving what context he could without influencing their expectations. She was always good with words, he told Daniel. Persuasive. That's what made her successful in sales. Now, as midnight approached, Harold found himself thinking not of Margaret, but of the 3 remarkable people their children had become. Rachel's fierce protectiveness, Jake's quiet depth, Daniel's insatiable curiosity, strengths forged partly through adversity. Perhaps that was Margaret's unintended legacy, the family that had grown stronger in her absence, the children who had flourished despite, or because of, the challenges her leaving had created. the man Harold had become when forced to be both mother and father. He picked up the family portrait from last Christmas, all three children around him, Rachel holding baby Lily, complete, whole. Whatever happened Thursday wouldn't change that fundamental truth. Harold placed the photo back on his desk and turned out the light. The house settled around him with familiar sounds: the tick of the grandfather clock, the subtle creak of floorboards, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the home that had witnessed their grief, their growth, their triumph. Thursday would come, and they would face it together, as they always had. The next morning, Harold called the number Margaret had left. "Hello?" Her voice sounded cautious, hopeful. "Margaret, it's Harold. The children have agreed to meet with you." A sharp intake of breath. "All of them?" "Yes. Thursday evening at Riverside Cafe, 6:30. They want neutral territory." "Of course, whatever they're comfortable with," she said quickly. "Thank you, Harold. I know you didn't have to." "I'm doing this for them," he interrupted gently. "They need to make their own decisions about you." "I understand." A pause. "How are they? Can you tell me anything before I see them?" Harold considered the request. "They're good people, Margaret. Kind, successful, close to each other. That's all you need to know for now. The rest is for them to share if they choose to." Another pause. "That's fair. Thursday at 6:30 then." "Goodbye, Margaret." Harold ended the call, feeling a strange sense of peace. The wheels were in motion now. Whatever happened next, his children would navigate it together with his steady support behind them. He sent a group text confirming the arrangements. 3 different responses came quickly. Rachel: "I'll be there. Not staying long." Jake: "Daniel: Thank you for arranging this, Dad. Will you be coming?" Harold replied: "I'll drop you off and pick you up after if you want. This is your time with her." Daniel: "I think we'd like you there, Dad." "Right, guys." Rachel: "Absolutely. We do this as a family or not at all." Jake: "Dad should be there." Harold felt a swell of emotion at their solidarity. After a moment, he typed, "I'll be there. Family meeting. Family. As it should be." The Riverside Cafe sat on a quiet corner, large windows overlooking the park where Harold had once pushed 3 children on swings. They arrived together, a united front, Harold, Rachel, Jake, and Daniel, parking in the small lot adjacent to the brick building. "She's already here," Jake noted, gesturing toward a silver sedan with rental plates. Rachel smoothed her blazer, armor for difficult depositions repurposed for this meeting. "Remember, we set the terms. We can leave any time." "We know, Rach," Daniel said gently, adjusting his glasses. At 24, he was the only one without concrete memories of their mother, yet perhaps carried the heaviest curiosity. Harold watched his children steel themselves, proud of their courage, their solidarity. "Ready?" 3 nods, varying in certainty. They walked in together, Harold slightly behind, supporting without leading. Margaret sat in a corner booth, nervously shredding a napkin. Her head lifted at the door's chime, eyes widening as she took in the sight of them. No longer the children she'd left, but adults with her eyes, her smile, Harold's steady gaze. She half rose, uncertain of protocol after 2 decades. "You came," she breathed, voice catching. Rachel's posture stiffened. Jake nodded once, acknowledgement without warmth. Daniel stared openly, finally seeing the woman who had existed primarily in photographs and imagination. Harold guided them to the table, a hand briefly touching each child's shoulder in support. They arranged themselves naturally, family on one side, Margaret alone on the other. "Thank you for meeting me," Margaret began, clearly having rehearsed her opening. "I know I don't deserve—" "Why did you leave?" Daniel interrupted, unable to contain the question that had shaped his life. Margaret's practiced speech faltered. She looked at Harold, who offered no assistance, then back at Daniel, her youngest, who had no memories of her. "I was unhappy," she said finally, the simple truth landing heavily. "And selfish. I convinced myself you'd all be better off." "Better off without a mother?" Rachel's voice was controlled, but sharp. Margaret shook her head. "There's no justification. I told myself stories to make it easier. That Harold was the better parent anyway, that you'd barely remember me." Her eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong about everything. Have you confronted someone who deeply hurt your family? Share your experience in the comments. Like if you admire this family's courage, follow to see if they find healing or hold their boundaries." Jake, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "What changed, besides Eric dying?" Margaret's hand stilled on her shredded napkin. "Years ago, I saw Rachel in a newspaper article about a legal case. I started following all your lives from a distance. Watched Daniel graduate through university social media. Found Jake's furniture website." She swallowed hard. "I realized what I'd thrown away." "So you've been stalking us?" Rachel's eyes narrowed. "No, just public information, Christmas cards from mutual friends." Margaret looked at Harold. "No one would tell me much." "They protected you." "As they should have," Harold said quietly, his first contribution to the conversation. A silence fell, broken only by the soft cafe ambience around them. The family exchanged glances, their silent communication honed over years of navigating life without the woman across from them. Daniel leaned forward slightly, breaking the perfect unity. "What do you want from us now?" The direct question seemed to catch Margaret off guard. I'd like to know you, as you are now, if you'll let me." Rachel's scoff was barely audible. Jake's expression remained unreadable. Daniel's eyes never left Margaret's face, cataloging every feature he shared with this stranger. "We built a life without you," Rachel said finally. "A good one." Margaret nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I can see that. Your father did an amazing job." "We did it together," Harold corrected gently. "The four of us." In that moment, something shifted. A subtle realignment. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but recognition of the truth. They had become a family of four, complete in themselves. Margaret seemed to sense it too, her expression both sad and accepting. "I know it's too late to be your mother. I just hope, maybe someday, we might know each other somehow." The cafe door chimed as new customers entered, breaking the heavy moment. Daniel glanced at his father, then his siblings, before returning his gaze to Margaret. "We need time," he said simply. For the first time that evening, all four family members were in perfect agreement. Rachel broke the silence first, years of courtroom experience making her comfortable with difficult confrontations. "I remember everything," she said, voice steady despite the emotion beneath. "I remember the day you left. Dad trying to explain where you'd gone, making mac and cheese for dinner because he didn't know what else to cook." Margaret flinched, but held Rachel's gaze. "I remember becoming the woman of the house at 8 years old, learning to do laundry, helping with my brothers." Rachel's professional composure cracked slightly. "I remember crying in the bathroom so Dad wouldn't hear." "Rachel," Margaret began. "I'm not finished." Rachel straightened, the senior partner asserting control. I want you to understand what you left behind. Dad working 2 jobs until he could barely stand. Jake having nightmares. Daniel asking when Mommy was coming home, until eventually he stopped asking. Margaret's shoulders slumped with each detail, physical manifestation of understanding dawning. So when you say you want to know us now, Rachel concluded, you need to understand who we became because you weren't there. Jake, who had been silent, finally spoke. I used to watch the door, he said quietly, for months, thinking you'd come back. His simple statement landed harder than Rachel's detailed account. Jake rarely spoke about emotions, making his words carry particular weight. Eventually, I stopped looking, he continued. We built something without you. He glanced at his father, a moment of acknowledgement passing between them. It wasn't always easy, but it was ours. Daniel studied Margaret throughout his siblings' testimonies, noting her reactions, the family resemblances, his own analytical mind in the way she processed information, Rachel's determined chin, Jake's contemplative gaze. I don't remember you, Daniel said when Jake finished. Not really, just impressions, a perfume scent, the sound of your laugh. He adjusted his glasses. I've spent my life researching things, filling in blanks. You were the biggest blank. Margaret wiped a tear. I'm so sorry, Daniel. I'm not looking for another apology, he replied calmly. I want to understand. Were you ever happy with us before you left? The question surprised everyone. Even Harold looked at his youngest with newfound appreciation for his insight. Margaret hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes. When you were born, Daniel. When each of you was born, those were the happiest moments of my life. She looked down at her hands. I didn't know how to sustain that happiness through the everyday responsibilities. I was young, selfish. And now, Rachel challenged. Now I know what matters, Margaret answered quietly. Too late, but I know. Harold had remained supportively silent, letting his children lead. Now he observed how they'd naturally taken roles. Rachel the prosecutor, Jake the witness, Daniel the investigator. They needed no protection from him anymore. What do you want from us now? Rachel asked, echoing Daniel's earlier question, but with more edge. Really? The truth? Margaret took a deep breath. A chance, not to be your mother again. I know that's impossible, but to know who you've become, to be something. Anything you're willing to allow. Silence fell again. The cafe had emptied around them, their intense conversation creating a bubble no one wanted to disturb. Jake finally broke it. I could meet for coffee, occasionally. Daniel nodded. I have questions, things I'd like to know about you, about your side of the family. Rachel remained rigid, unconvinced. I have a daughter now, Lily. She has all the family she needs. I understand, Margaret whispered, new pain crossing her features at the grandchild she hadn't known existed. Rachel leaned forward. If, and this is a big if, I ever decide you can meet her, it would be as a friend of the family. Nothing more. That would be more than I deserve, Margaret acknowledged. As the conversation continued, Harold watched his children assert their boundaries, speak their truths, make individual choices that honored their own needs rather than any sense of obligation. The pride he felt nearly overwhelmed him. They had done this together, raised children who could face the person who had hurt them most and speak with dignity, with clarity, with self-knowledge. Whatever happened next, that achievement remained. We should go, Rachel finally said, checking her watch. Lily's babysitter needs to get home. They rose together, family unit still intact, despite the emotional earthquake of the evening. Margaret remained seated, understanding the distance still between them. "Thank you," she said simply, "for hearing me out." Harold nodded once, acknowledging what remained unspoken, that they had given her more than she had right to expect, less than she might have hoped for. Outside, under the cafe's awning, the family paused, processing together as they always had. "You okay?" Harold asked softly, looking at each child in turn. 3 different expressions, 3 different journeys, but all nodded. "We did it," Daniel said, a small smile forming. Together. And in that moment, Harold knew with absolute certainty they would be all right. The living room hummed with familiar energy as Harold watched his children process the evening. They'd returned to the family home instinctively, their safe harbor after emotional storms since childhood. Rachel paced near the fireplace, heels discarded, lawyer's mind cataloging the encounter. "I didn't expect to feel anything," she admitted. "But seeing her face when I mentioned Lily—" She shook her head, conflicted. Jake sat quietly, fingers tracing wood-grain patterns on the coffee table he'd crafted for Harold's birthday 3 years ago. "She's just a person," he observed. "Not the villain or the saint we built in our heads. Just someone who made a terrible choice." Daniel leaned forward from his perch on the armchair. "I'm glad we went. Even if nothing comes from it, I needed to see her. To make her real." Harold absorbed their reflections, these adults who had once been wounded children. The meeting had changed something subtle yet fundamental, not erasing the pain of abandonment, but perhaps relocating it from center stage to the periphery of their identities. "What will you each do now?" he asked gently. Rachel sighed, the armor of anger softening slightly. "I'm not ready for regular contact. Maybe someday, but not now." She looked at her father. "Is that okay?" "Of course it is," Harold assured her. "This isn't about what I want." "But what do you want, Dad?" Daniel asked, perceptive as always. Harold considered the question carefully. "I want what I've always wanted. For you 3 to be happy, to feel secure in who you are. Whatever decisions help that happen are the right ones." Jake nodded, appreciating the simple truth. "I'll probably meet her for coffee next month. No rush." "I'm going to email her," Daniel decided. "I have family history questions. Medical stuff, too, for practical reasons." Rachel watched her brothers with grudging acceptance. "We don't have to make the same choice," she realized aloud. "No," Harold agreed. "You never did. Remember when Jake chose trade school while you and Daniel went to university? Different paths, same support." The reminder brought small smiles, the family history they shared more meaningful than the one they'd lost. Later, after his children had departed with hugs tighter than usual, Harold returned to his study. The letter that had started everything still rested in his desk drawer. Beside it lay the old family photo Margaret had enclosed. Harold opened the bottom drawer, removing a wooden box that held important mementos: Daniel's first drawing, Jake's woodshop ribbon, Rachel's law school acceptance letter. After a moment's contemplation, he placed Margaret's letter and photo inside, neither destroying them nor displaying them, simply acknowledging their place in a past that had shaped but no longer defined their present. Closing the box, Harold straightened the current family portrait on his desk, all 3 children around him at Rachel's wedding, their closeness evident in relaxed smiles and comfortable postures. No empty spaces, no missing pieces, complete in themselves. Through the window, stars peppered the clear night sky. Harold felt a profound peace settle over him. not the temporary relief of a crisis averted, but the enduring tranquility of a life well lived despite its unexpected turns. Whatever came next with Margaret would be the children's story to write. His own had reached a satisfying conclusion long ago, when he discovered that the family they created after abandonment was stronger, more resilient, and more loving than he could have imagined possible. Harold switched off the desk lamp and headed to bed, the house creaking comfortably around him, home to 2 decades of tears and triumphs, all of which had led to this moment of quiet certainty. They would be all right, all of them, together and separately, just as they always had been. You've sat at a kitchen table with trembling hands, haven't you? That moment when life shifts beneath you. Unexpected news, a betrayal, a return from the past you thought was safely behind you. We all have our Harold moments, when an envelope arrives that threatens the peace we've carefully built. The tears that come aren't just for what was lost, but for what might still be taken away. Ain't it something how the hardest blows often come from the hands we once held? Trust, when broken, leaves marks that fade but never quite disappear, like Harold's wedding band tan line, visible decades later. You felt that phantom pain too, I suspect. The empty chair at your table. The photographs you've tucked away in drawers. The questions left unanswered when someone walks away. These wounds change us, reshape our very foundations like water carving through stone, persistent and patient. But here's what I know about folks like us, who've weathered a few storms. We rebuild. We find strength in the broken places. Remember how Harold discovered that Margaret couldn't hurt him anymore? That moment when you realize your happiness no longer depends on someone who chose to leave. That's not just healing, that's transformation. The clock keeps ticking, the floorboards keep creaking, and somehow we keep going. We become the steady presence others rely on, just as Harold did for Rachel, Jake, and Daniel. And those children, they grow up watching how we handle heartbreak. They learn resilience not from lectures, but from living rooms where a single parent helps with homework after working double shifts. From kitchens where mistakes are made with dinner, but love is served in abundance. From the quiet dignity of moving forward without bitterness. Your grandchildren see it too, this strength you've carved from sorrow. The truest victory isn't in confrontation or even forgiveness. It's in the day you realize you're complete without the missing piece. When Harold placed that letter in his memory box, neither destroyed nor displayed, he acknowledged its place in a story that belonged to the past. Your story continues too, with chapters yet unwritten, in a book held steady by weathered hands that still know how to turn the page. Perhaps that's the greatest gift of our years, the wisdom to know which battles shape us and which merely scar us, the courage to stand firmly in the life we've built, and the peace that comes from understanding that sometimes the family we create is stronger than the one we lose.